Welcome to EJB Talks, Rutgers Blaustein School experts in policy, planning, and health, where we talk with our faculty and staff experts, as well as students, about how the fields of public policy, urban planning, public health, health administration, and public and urban informatics affect your lives. Welcome to EJB Talks. I'm Stuart Shapiro, the Dean of the Blaustein School, and the purpose of this podcast is to highlight the work my colleagues and our alumni in the fields of policy, planning, and health are doing. For what is likely to be our penultimate episode of this 10th season of EJB Talks, we're talking to Dr. Christopher Black, who graduated from our undergraduate public health program and is now vice chair of our advisory board. Chris works at Merck when he's not advising or harassing me about how to make the Blaustein School a better place. Welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Thanks, Stuart. Wasn't expecting that, but that's very true.
So we always tend to start these with origin stories. Tell us a little bit about why you decided to get a public health degree, because that is relevant to the younger members of our audience.
Yeah, thanks. So I think like many students entering into college, often many of them want to go into pre-med, become physicians, and I was just like a lot of them. And I would say just like many of them as well, I felt confident that this was going to be my future plan until I took the chemistry and organic chemistry, and then I found myself realizing this isn't for me. But I didn't give up. It was a difficult pill to swallow, but I didn't give up on my interest in health. And after taking some of the intro courses within the public health curriculum, I came to learn and love that public health really, I think, ties together so many different disciplines and opens your mind and how interdependent one's health is with their surroundings. And personally, to me, my real aha moment was when I took my intro to epidemiology with Dr. Schneider. And after the first day, I fell in love with it. And I spoke with her after class and said, what can I do? What degree do I need to get? What career can I have? This is what I want to do. And I finally felt like I found my purpose, which is such a corny thing to say, but it's so true. So ever since then, everything she said, I've done. And I find myself just following those footsteps ever since.
For those of you that don't know, Dr. Dona Schneider was a longtime faculty member here at the Blaustein School, former Associate Dean of Academic Programs, and my colleague for nearly 20 years, retired right after the pandemic occurred. So, and we miss her here. It's funny you say that about organic chemistry. The number of students that we get that because they ran aground in that class in particular, and we're actually trying to figure out what's a better way to sort of message that to that audience in particular, those that fail or get a D or just not happy with their grade in organic chemistry, or come to the realization that that's not what they want to do because of that class. They don't have to have done badly in it to come here. But it is certainly an audience that we are looking at attracting to a greater degree.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you got your bachelor's degree in public health. The same place about 300 of our students will be in next week at graduation. And you had to make a decision about what next. And you got a master's degree and a doctorate in public health. And you've sort of alluded to this in your talking about your love for the material. But taking on that much extra education is not a decision to take lightly. And what was your thought process as you did it?
Yeah, so after talking with Dr. Schneider towards the end of my undergrad, we said, hey, what's next? And I said, I want to do research. I love it. She said, well, then you need to get a master's. So she suggested, and I did whatever she said. So I got a dual concentration in epidemiology and biostatistics, which in my mind go hand in hand. And it wasn't necessarily easy to complete all that in this short period of time, but it really helped me leave and understand the intersection of those two disciplines much better. I feel like you can't design a study if you don't know how to analyze the data, and you can't analyze data if you don't know where this data came from. So, so I finished my master's, worked for a couple of years. So after I finished my master's, I met with Dr. Schneider and she said, what next? I said, I want to do my PhD. And she looked me in the eyes and said, you're not ready. You're too young. You're too immature. You're not ready. Go work for a couple of years. And I was heartbroken. So I worked for a couple years, and then I actually teach that class that I took with her that really turned me on to epidemiology as kind of an homage to Dr. Schneider and trying to get other students interested in epidemiology and types of research. And then years later, I called her up and I said, I think I'm ready. She said, yeah, I think you're ready. So I went back and I did my PhD part time at the School of Public Health in epidemiology while working full time.
Yeah, and how was that? Because a PhD is not something to that's a small time commitment, and
No.
so doing that while you're working full time, can you give me a picture of what that was like?
Yeah, so I don't want to make this all about Dr. Schneider, but I'll tell you another story about her. So after I passed my qualifying exam, she called me right away and said, "Don't you dare rest in your laurels. You have to get to work." So wrote my protocol. At my protocol defense, she tells me, "Hey, just so you know, I'm retiring in 6 months. You have to finish your dissertation in 6 months." So I finished my dissertation in 6 months, and for those who are not aware, usually those take at least a year. But she was right, and she did not retire in 6 months, which I found out at my dissertation defense. But I did have a son, my first son, 1 week after I graduated. So if I didn't finish in 6 months, there's a good chance I would have finished it for a few years.
Yeah.
But to answer your question more directly, it was tough for sure. It was a lot of working 9 to 5, staying in the office, doing work afterwards, or going to classes at night. And yeah, it took a lot, but it was. I had a goal in mind that this is what I needed. I worked in an industry where this is expected, and it made it a bit easier to sacrifice other things for to make to study that one night, or maybe not go out that weekend because I have a paper due, or spend a weekend coding to get my dissertation completed.
Yeah, I did most of my dissertation work while I was a full time graduate student, but I started working in Washington at what would be about 5 months before I defended, and I needed to essentially rewrite, do a lot of rewriting. I'd done all the primary research at that point, but a lot of the writing still had to be done, and those were a hard 5 months because it was not really a 9 to 5 job. It was more like an 8:30 to 6:30
Mm-hmm.
job. And just like you, I remember like, man, I can't get my social life started here while I'm doing
Yeah.
this, and had to make those sacrifices for a little while. It's not easy for sure. Um, Tell us about what you do at Merck.
So I've been at Merck for 13 years. I joined in a health economics and outcomes research fellowship program that was hosted back then. And I like to think really I break my responsibilities down into three areas: kind of pre-launch, at launch, and post-launch. What I mean launch, I mean basically regulatory approval. So before a drug, so while the drug is being in clinical development, phase two, phase three, I'm responsible for selecting the patient-reported outcomes that are included in the trial and help design those trials. So ultimately, my responsibility is to make sure that the patient perspective is accurately measured in the trial, understanding how the drugs impact or positively or negatively their quality of life, their activities of daily living, and so on. As we get closer to launch, so when a drug has gone through the FDA and EMA has been approved, we then have to work with national payers or health systems to explain that they're getting value for their money, that this drug is cost effective compared to the other available therapies, that it is going to improve outcomes, and it ultimately is going to be a good investment. And then at the time of after launch, really we need to understand how are these drugs being used? Who are the patients receiving them? Because they're often different than the clinical trials. How long are they on treatment? Are they adhering to how the way the drug is prescribed? Are they responding? So what are the clinical outcomes? Are they living longer? Are they staying? Are they avoiding a recurrence or disease progression? And then also, how do our drugs actually compare to other ones in the real world? So understanding, doing some really interesting studies to compare those. So my role is designing those real world evidence studies using either collecting data ourselves or using available data sets to do these analyses. And so currently my role is I'm the value evidence asset lead for a really innovative therapy we call individualized neoantigen therapy for cancer patients, which actually it's quite interesting. They take the patient's blood and the tissue and look at the different mutations that are present in the tumor versus in the blood. And using an AI algorithm, they select these mutations to manufacture an individualized therapy for these patients. And the phase
Wow.
two data is quite robust. It's pretty cutting edge stuff, and we're quite excited to be to working on it. So it's it's great. There's a lot of good research, work with a lot of really smart people. I enjoy it every day.
And that, I don't know much about this, but that individualized type of therapy I've seen referred to as some degree the future
Yeah,
of pharmaceuticals, really.
yeah. I think we've come a long way.
So let's complete the circle here and talk a little bit about how you use your public health background. Pharmaceuticals isn't the first area that public health or even health administration folks think about going into, but it's in my view, it's a place that makes a lot of sense for people with that background. And I'm wondering if you could make that connection for our audience.
Sure. So I enjoy doing research. I enjoy designing studies. I enjoy solving problems. I enjoy finding new solutions that help impact people's lives. So the other day I was actually updating my CV and I was going through the publication section, and you would think I'm schizophrenic based on all the different disease areas I've published in. So talking about during my master's, I worked at the Veterans Affairs Hospital, working on mental health and behavioral sciences. So topics like depression, suicidality, substance abuse, homelessness. During my master's thesis, I did on rugby injury surveillance, which is the first time I think I've ever been a part of a study that I was actually a patient and also the study investigator.
Wow.
So that's always an interesting thing. I've worked on STD awareness. I did my dissertation on severe maternal morbidity. And then at Merck, I've worked across all different disease areas. What I've learned is that the knowledge you gain with a public health degree and an epidemiology background is it's all disease agnostic. You can work in any industry on any different topic, and as long as you understand and can implement the skills that you've learned, you can do anything really. And I find the why pharma part. Pharma plays a huge role in the global health ecosystem. What we do does have an impact, and it's really interesting to be involved in that, but also work with really strong scientists doing really robust research where the bar is set higher and higher every day. And I always find myself challenged. And it's just, I've worked in government, academia for a little bit, and also pharma. And I could say it's a really great place to work, and I really enjoy it.
Yeah, if we ever had any doubt of that, obviously our experience with COVID and now we see bird flu in the newspapers. We don't solve those problems without figuring out the pharmaceutical solutions.
Yep.
Um, what's the best part of your job?
Hmm. That's, I like, it's one of the best, but probably one of my favorite parts is I'm always intellectually stimulated every day. You know, just talking about the therapy we're working on, figuring out some of the logistics of how to deliver that is quite challenging. Thinking about how do you demonstrate value for an individualized therapy compared to some that's available off the shelf is different, right? And then just thinking outside the box, being able to leverage new methodologies, data sources, embracing the whole AI, ML, boom. I know enough to get myself in trouble. I don't know enough to really implement it in a very effective way, but I'm continuing to learn, and we're being empowered to do that. And it also comes with a lot of opportunities to present and travel. You learn a lot about yourself when you're in front of a few thousand people on a
Mhm.
stage all by yourself, and everyone there is much smarter than you are, and here you are trying to tell them about some of your research. So it's uh, it's really I enjoy it. Like I said, I think, but the most important part for me is the intellectual stimulation.
So next week from Monday, I get to be in front of a couple thousand people at our graduation, and so I know what you're talking about. But as I think about those people I'll be in front of, particularly the graduates, and given your expertise, particularly the public health and health administration students, as they're looking at a lot of big decisions in the next few years. Um, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I would say for the undergraduates, get to know the staff and faculty, find a sponsor, find someone who will promote you, who will give you good advice. I think we often don't leverage or utilize the faculty, knowing that part of their responsibility, it really is to help advise students, not just to teach. And then for those who are graduating, take every opportunity as a learning experience. You might learn that you like something, you might learn that you hate something, and you don't want to do that. But that's a good thing to learn so that at the next opportunity that comes about, you can decide and have an educated decision whether to do that or to not move forward with that opportunity.
It is really important to understand what you don't like,
Yeah,
just as much as what you like. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing that experience and advice, which I think will be valuable for our students.
great. Thanks, Stuart.
Also, of course, a big thank you to Tamara Swedberg and to Karen Olson, who make this podcast run. We will be back probably with one more episode this season, probably wrapping up with something on politics, although we may wait until a certain trial in New York City concludes before we tape that episode. Until then, stay safe.